Good to see you.
Thanks, Rob. So thanks for having me. I do want to apologize because I am in Austria right now, and I had to sort of set up some kind of a video with my phone. I wasn't. It would be a lot better if I was at home, obviously, but that doesn't matter. So I just want to go through a few things with you. I'll talk about sixes a little bit later and a little bit about field lacrosse. I just want to talk to you a little bit of background on the two-man game, just so you understand. Obviously, I'm a big believer in the two-man game because that's what box lacrosse is. But just so you understand my background, I played field lacrosse. I played for Canada. I've coached field lacrosse for about 10 years. My son played in the Division I lacrosse in the United States. He was one of those Canadians who goes down there and played in the United States. So I understand field lacrosse. I'm not a great field lacrosse coach, and I don't claim to be, but I understand field lacrosse, and I understand the benefits of potentially having a two-man game inside it. I think most of you, if you're paying attention to what's going on in the United States, which most of you probably are, you'll see that many programs are adding in a two-man game now. And so the reason is, if you look at the evolution of the two-man game in field lacrosse, when I played for Canada, which was back in the 1980s, the Canadian team struggled with how to beat the Americans because we didn't know how to play field lacrosse. So what we tried to do is we tried to play box lacrosse against the Americans, and we lost. And then we tried to play field lacrosse against the Americans. We lost again because they were too good at, and we just weren't very good field lacrosse players at that time. We were really good box lacrosse players. So what's happened now is you're getting literally thousands, hundreds of Canadian kids, box lacrosse players, going down to the United States to play. And then what's happened over the last 15 years is a lot of those kids who went down to the United States have stayed down there, and they're now coaching in the NCAA. And they have box lacrosse backgrounds, like Matt Brown in Denver. And there are many others. So Matt Brown and some of these other people, over the course of the last 5 years, 10 years, have tried to figure out ways to bring the two-man game into the field lacrosse game, which of course that's where it's evolved to today and what they're doing. So I don't have a lot of time, and obviously I could spend hours talking about this, but I'm going to basically go fairly fast. If you have any questions, you can ask me. I'm just going to go through a couple of things. I have done a lot of research on the two-man game in field lacrosse because I've actually had a number of field lacrosse coaches in England and in the United States who have reached out to me and asked me to help them implement two-man games. So I did some homework. I have some friends of mine who coach in Victoria. I'm from Victoria in Canada. And so I talked to them. I talked to some American coaches who run the two-man game. And then I've come up with my own ideas on this after talking to them. I personally have not coached a field lacrosse team using the two-man game, but I've watched teams that do. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of what they're doing, but it might not be exactly what they're doing. So here's my feelings on this, and then I'll get into the actual demonstration of what to do. The first thing, and I read a lot of information on the two-man game from some Canadian and American coaches in the United States. And one thing that stood out to me was one of the coaches said that if you're going to run the two-man game, you actually have to buy into it. And I think that's a big thing, because right now I'm seeing coaches where they're telling me that they run a little bit of two-man game, and then I watch their teams play, and I don't see any two-man game. So if you have to actually buy into it, because it's very specific, and so you have to teach those specific parts of the game. You can't just say, well, we might try a little bit of two-man game over here. It's not really going to work if you do that. So you have to buy in and do it. You also have to understand that it will complement your system. A lot of coaches are afraid to try something new. And so if you look at the game today, games evolve. You look at the basketball offenses, you look at the NLL offenses. I coached the NLL 15 years ago, 10 years ago. The offenses that are running in the NLL now are very different than the offenses we ran 10 years ago. So things evolve and they change. And that's what's happening in field lacrosse. So it's not a bad thing to change. It's not a bad thing to try other things. Because what happens is the defensive coaches figure out what you're doing and want to give a different look. When you think about the two-man game, keep in mind that what it does is it gives structure. So there's 3 ways that you can do it. You can actually run a traditional set, which you run now. So your traditional, I call it the American or English traditional game, where you're dodging and you're trying to draw a slide, and then you're dumping to the guy, and then you keep moving the ball until you find the open man. To me, that's the traditional system. I watched the Flags games this weekend, and I specifically watched to see if I could see any two-man game, and I didn't see any of the games. What I did see is the occasional post, but I didn't really see any two-man games. And that's not a criticism. I was just looking to see if they were actually doing it or not. So I didn't see the two-man game being run. And I'll talk about those differences in a second. Another thing you can do is you can run your traditional system. And what you can also do is you could run a system where you're running your traditional system with a little bit of two-man game, or you could run an actual two-man game system. So it's almost, if any of you are basketball players, I'm not sure how much basketball there is in England, but in the United States and Canada, there's lots of basketball, and box lacrosse is very much like basketball. So I was actually a basketball coach before I was a lacrosse coach. So if you understand basketball, you'll understand the two-man game a little bit easier. If you watch basketball, it will help you do that. So you can still run your 1-4-1 sets. You can run your 2-3-2 sets, but out of the 2-3-2 set or out of the 1-4-1 set, you can run a two-man game or part of a two-man game on that. So I'm going to move here quickly, and I apologize for that. And I also apologize why I did this, but I couldn't do a PowerPoint, which I would rather do with you guys. So what I did is I just made up my own sheets. So just hang on here 1 second. I'll flip my screen. So, Rob, can everybody see that?
Yeah, I can see it fine. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through this, what I've got on here. The first thing you have to understand when you teach box lacrosse, you teach a two-man game in the field game, is you have to teach what we call the game within the game, which is a common thing that you probably do too. So you still have your traditional one-on-one, but then you have a 2-on-2, and you also have 3-on-3, and then you have 4-on-4. So what you're going to do is you're going to teach the two-man game first, and then you teach it within a 3-man game, and then you teach the two-man game within a 4-man game. And that's how you teach it, that's how you practice it, and then that's how you play it. You have to teach the players the difference between a post, a pick and roll, and a slip or a brush. So what I see, for example, when I watched the Flags game the other day, I watched the senior team playing, they ran a few posts. So the difference between a post and a pick is a post is where the player just stands there and the dodger goes past them with the ball, and the person who sets a post doesn't do anything. They just stand there and then they basically freeze. And I understand that in field lacrosse, unlike box lacrosse, you can't move, you can't hit them with your stick, you can't do anything that would be deemed as a moving screen, etc. But you can still play the two-man game inside that system. So the goal, why do you want to play the two-man game? If you look at the bottom here, I've got number 3. It says the goal is to get the defense, number 1, to go underneath screens. You want the defense to hesitate, which means you've got a defender coming along and all of a sudden there's a screen there. You want them to switch. You want them to lose a step. And by that, what I mean is, say a sub player is dodging down the alley, which you guys like to do, and all of a sudden there's a screen there. So now the defender has to decide if he's going to go under the screen, is he going to go over the screen, or is he going to run into the screen, or are they going to switch? And sometimes just that hesitation, because he doesn't know what to do, give the ball carrier a step or two. And good shooters, all they need is a step. So if they get a step or two now on the same person who is checking them, then that screen has become effective. The other thing you want to do is to try to get them confused on their switches. When we look at the two-man game, another thing that's not taught very often, and this is something we do in box lacrosse a lot, is to not only to pick, but to pick and roll. And not only to pick and roll, but we also pick and re-pick. So we'll set the first screen, and the player comes around and the defense switches, and we'll immediately turn. After the offensive ball carrier goes maybe 3 or 4 feet, we'll turn and go back and re-pick that player again, which causes the second switch. Quite often defenders will be okay on the first switch, but quite often they'll make mistakes or there'll be confusion on the second switch. You also have to teach them the difference between a pick and roll and a slip. So up top where I said you have a post Post is where a player just stands there, and after the ball carrier goes around, he doesn't do anything else. A pick and roll means that the person who sets the screen, after the ball carrier goes around, he has 4 choices. Choice number 1, he can roll to the net and receive a pass. Option number 2 is he can go set a second screen on the ball carrier. Option number 3 is he can replace, which means the person who set the screen goes to where the ball carrier came from. So that way, if they do double team or they double switch onto the ball, which happens quite often, ball carrier knows where the pick and roll person is. They haven't gone to the net. They've gone maybe behind where that person came from. And in the United States, they call that shadowing. So the option 4 is for them to shadow the ball carrier. And that way, if there's a double team or a slide, again, the ball carrier knows where they are. So because you got 4 or 5 options off every screen, it makes it very difficult for the defense to do what they want to do. So the way that you implement a 2-man game, if you want to, is obviously, which I said at the beginning, you have to buy into it. But in practice, you have to teach them how to pick and roll. And I think part of the reason coaches are not implementing 2-man games is because the coach themselves maybe doesn't understand the 2-man game. They don't really understand how to run a pick and roll. So you have to, in practice, break down the pick and roll and show the kids what to do on that pick and roll. You have to teach them how to pick and slip. So again, for terminology, for those of you who are unaware, a slip pick is also called a brush pick. And that's where you go to set a screen and the defense thinks you're going to set a screen. And as the defense starts to prepare to switch, the person who's setting the screen does not set a pick, but actually continues out of that screen and goes to the net. And quite often what will happen is you find the defenders will be flat-footed. It's very, very effective and very, very sneaky. And the way you set up the slip pick or the brush pick is you have to go over and set 2 or 3 picks first. So the defender gets used to you setting the pick and they switch. You set a pick and they switch. You go to set the 3rd pick and they start to switch and you brush to the net and you find yourself wide open. It's very, very effective. You can set them to set a post, and off the post, they can slip to the net. Whenever you slip, you always slip to the net, just for clarification. You can set them to pick and fill, which I mentioned a second ago. So that means they're going to set a screen and then fill to the spot where the ball carrier was, or to pick and shadow. There is literature on this. If you look online, you can find more information. And every team, of course, does it a little bit different. Now, the key to a true 2-man game, and you're seeing this happen with the good teams in the United States, is in order to be effective, you have to run your 2-man game on ball and off ball. So not only are they going to have to be picked on ball and off ball, but you're going to have scoring opportunities from off ball. I could be wrong, but from the field lacrosse that I watch, in the traditional sense, there's very little off ball scoring, unless a defender unless you hit somebody off a slide, for example. Another good thing about running an off ball offense is if you've got pick and rolls off ball, they have slide packages and they have responsibilities for sliding to the ball. All of a sudden now the guy that's supposed to be sliding to help, his man is setting a screen high away from the ball and he has to honor that. And now because he has to honor the guy setting the pick and roll away from the ball, it takes his attention away from the other side of the floor where the ball is. And so you're going to do 2 things. One, you're going to get scoring opportunities off ball. And the second thing, you're going to keep the people busy who are supposed to be sliding. So that's that. So, and I will draw some of these on diagrams for you in a second, but I just wanted to do this first for you. So in a practice, the way that I would run a practice, and I've talked to my friends who do actually run the 2-man system in the United States and in Canada. But what you have to do is you have to practice the 2-man game every day in order to teach it, again, buying into it. And it doesn't have to be your number 1 offense, but they have to learn how to do it properly. You can practice the 2-man game. You can practice the 2-man game within a 3-man game, so 3-on-3. So my friend told me, who runs this a lot, he said he does mostly 3-on-3, but he also is coaching all Canadian kids, so they already understand how to play 2-on-2. And then you can run 4-on-4. And when you play 4-on-4, you've got a 2-man game on either side of the field. And so you'd be playing on ball and off ball. Another thing which you need to do is you need to practice playing on ball and off ball. So whenever you're doing 2-on-2, you want to do 2-on-2 drills on ball and 2-on-2 drills off ball, so that they learn how to roll to the net without the ball. And defensively, that will help a lot. So another thing that they do, when my son he played in Pittsburgh, Division I lacrosse there, every other week, every 2 or 3 weeks, their coach, who was an American, and he had some Canadians on his team, obviously, they would play box lacrosse either on the field, or they would play box lacrosse actually in some kind of a box or somewhere where they could play. So you have to let the kids be. The reason I'm saying that is not because I'm a box lacrosse coach, but in box lacrosse, players are going to set hundreds of picks a game. So if you're just setting occasional picks in your practice, sometimes you just have to let them play box, because what they'll learn to do is just set many more picks. They'll get much more experience at it. Another thing my friend said to say to you is that sometimes when he's practicing, if you watch box lacrosse is much more physical than field lacrosse, and they can cheat a lot more. You can slash, you can cross check, obviously, which you can't do in field other than on ball. But when you set screens in box lacrosse, you're allowed to hit the person, you're allowed to move, you're allowed to push them. Now, obviously in field lacrosse, you can't do that. But he told me what he does sometimes is he lets them just play the 2-man game, and he calls it playing dirty. Not dirty in the sense of hurting anybody, but dirty in the sense of breaking the rules. And so he lets them cheat a little bit when they're setting picks, just to let them learn how to do that properly. Okay, so I'll just show you here on my clipboard very quickly, and then I'll be done. So for example, and I hope you can see this. So for example, say you're running a 1-4-1. So I apologize because I got this set up in my hotel room and it's not that great. So say you're running a 1-4-1. So I hope you guys can see that. Tell me if you can. So what you want to do is you want to play in threes. And let's go with a 2-3-2. So say you've got 2, 3, and then a guy behind the net here and a guy behind the net there, in more of a traditional system. So what you can do on this is, you see here, you have 3 players over here. And here you have 3 players. And here you have 3 players. So what they can do is those 3 players can play in the 2-man game. So if somebody wants to dodge down the alley, if this guy wants to dodge down the alley, this player can come up and pick here. And then we go into the different picks: pick, repick, pick and roll. Off ball, this player can go over here and set a pick here, which takes away this slide. This guy can come to the net. This guy can go this way. So now that gives him a pass off the dodge. We still have our guy behind the net here in case we miss the net. These 2 guys can play in the 2-man game, or these 2 guys can play in the 2-man game. These 2 guys can play in the 2-man game, or you can play in threes where they're playing in the 2-man game. So when you practice this, to practice the 2-man game, the way you would set it up is you start with just a pick and roll. So you have a player here and a player here. He passes the ball here. He comes and sets up screen. So you have to teach them, because in picks, we can pick strong side or we can back pick. I'll show you that in a second. So strong side pick, this guy comes this way, sets the screen. He comes around. This guy rolls to the net. There's a simple drill for you to run. If you're going to run a back pick, which is very effective in lacrosse, you can run the same screen this way. So the ball is here. This player comes and screens here, or posts as you call it, screen. If it's a screen, he's going to roll. This player goes this way, and this player goes this way. And there's your pass off that. You can run the same thing behind the net. And I know I've seen this quite a bit in field lacrosse, but it's mostly posts here. So you can run a pick and roll behind the net. not so much a roll, but more of a pick-repick. So I'll show you the pick-repick. So what happens is this player passes to here, and he comes over here and sets this screen. This player comes around the screen this way. So now we have our picker is here. This guy comes around the screen. The defenders will switch. So this defender switches this way, and then this defender is going to take this guy. Instead of this guy rolling to the net, now we've got the ball here with the defender here. He turns and comes back up here and sets a second screen here. This space is only 5 or 6 feet. This guy turns with the ball and goes back this way, which causes the defense to switch again. And then this guy rolls to the net. You can run pick-repicks off ball as well as on ball. So you can run your traditional defense where you have your dodges down the alley, you have your dodges across from side to side, except in those dodges, you can add pick and rolls or slips. So I'll just show you the slip really quickly.
Well, can you just put your camera just slightly, tilt it slightly up, because we just lost it, just come down just a little bit.
How's that?
That's perfect, thank you.
Sorry. So it's on a slip pick, what happens is, again, say the ball is here. Here's the defender. And here's the guy that's going to set the pick is here. And the pick could come from here. It could come from here. It could come from here. It could come from wherever you want it to come from. So this guy, the defender is here. So now this guy has set a number of picks throughout the quarter on here. So when he starts to come to set this pick again, and this guy starts to go this way with the ball, this defender is anticipating the switch because this guy is going to come hard over top and look for that shot on that sweep. So as this guy comes down to set the screen, and now the defender is here, this defender hedges a little bit this way to anticipate this pick, and this guy just slips right through here. And both of these defenders are stuck standing here. That's called the slip pick. So you can do that on and off ball, and it's very, 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 very difficult to defend. I can talk about that another time. So I've gone very fast, but I think I've used up my time that Rob gave me. So I don't want to keep talking. So should I open to questions or should I explain it more? Rob?
Well, we'll pause for that. We'll pause for some questions, and then you can always chalk up some more things as we go through. If anyone's got a question, throw your hand up. I had one, but I've temporarily forgotten it because it was about field. The thing that straight away I kind of went, oh, I've never thought of that, was when you were saying someone's dodging down the alley, and the player who's behind the goal at X, instead of being there as an easy outlet, goes up there and sets the pick. Never seen that in a field game in this country.
That's the beauty of the two-man game, is to do things that are totally different than what everybody's used to. And of course, what you'd have to do is, if you are going to do that, you'd have to slide somebody down from the other side, right?
Yeah, because you're putting in two defenders, and there are going to be two people, and the guy running down is going to have suddenly two defenders there, and it's.
But you'd have to slide. What I'm saying though is make sure you slide somebody down on the weak side, so if they shoot the ball and miss the net, you want to get the ball back.
Yeah.
So that's how you would do it. The idea, what we teach in the two-man game is you have to teach, we call it a motion offense, which is a basketball term again. And so what you do is you have structure. So the structure is the 1-4 or the 2-3-2. There's your structure. But within that structure, you run a motion offense, which means the players, you have to teach them to be creative and unpredictable. That's the term that I use with my box players. And so you can't tie their hands and say, well, you have to go over here and you have to set a pick here, and then you have to go here and you have to set a pick here. You have to allow them to go and set the pick where they want to. And then whether they're going to slip or whether they're going to pick-repick, that's up to the player. And that's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is the defender doesn't know how to defend it because he doesn't know what the offensive player is going to do. And the offensive player actually doesn't know what he's going to do because he's going to react to what the defender does. That's why it's so hard to defend.
I've got one more question, then we'll open up the floor. The field, it's obviously a much bigger field than the box floor or the sixers field. And you're potentially going to have to run 10 meters or so to get to that position to set the pick. How do you, because in box everything's quite tight, I'm just thinking is it going to be challenging to make that 10 meters to then set the pick, or do we somehow close everything in? I'm just trying to think of the field size on a typical field pitch.
What you have to do is, I think what the Americans and the box coach, the Canadian coaches in the United States, what they do is they call it shrinking the field. So you're basically playing on the same field, but the two players that are involved in the two-man game, on or off ball, they're playing within a 10-foot radius or a 3-meter radius. So it doesn't matter how big the field is. That pick and roll is going to be inside that 3-meter radius.
So, for example, that one where there's someone driving down the alley, instead of the player behind goal line extended where they would be, typically they're already sneaked up a few quality steps.
Right. Exactly.
And if there is a shot, they can still probably get back to goal line extended and beat the goalie to the back line.
Right, but the person who's setting the screen, in the scenario that you're giving, Rob, the person that's setting the screen is not going to be the person behind the net. You have to bring another person behind the net if that's going to be part of your offense. So, and the players would recognize that, right? If we see one player going up, then somebody on the other side has to go down behind the net, and you teach them that. I just want to, is there any other questions actually?
Yeah, we've got a first question from the floor. Dave Hallows, hi Dave, asked, how do offensive players communicate that they're hey, I'm going to come and set a pick or whatever? Dave, you can jump in and explain it more if you wish.
There's usually, once they get used to playing in the two-man game, nothing is said. They just watch, and they know that when they have the ball and they see the other offensive player coming towards them, the direction that player is coming towards them tells the ball carrier where they're going to set the pick, whether it's going to be a back pick, a strong pick. And as far as the pick-repick goes, the same thing happens. It's just, there's no communication there. They just learn on instinct how to do it. But that comes with practice. This is the part where you can't just say we're going to run a two-man game. They have to practice it. And obviously one of the reasons the Canadians are so good at it is because they play box lacrosse and they're practicing 1,000 times. When I watch the six-man game, and I'm a fan of the sixes, and obviously with the Olympics, et cetera, coming in, I watched the first sixes game like 3 years ago when the Americans played the Canadians, the very first time they played. And I looked at my son and I just said, wow, this is box lacrosse. And what they've done is, if I was coaching a sixes team, you're going to have transition. You're going to be able to score in transition. But a good sixes team is going to, if you look at, they're playing 5-on-5. It's a box lacrosse offense. And so you can't, the Americans, when they played the Canadians a few years ago, the Americans tried to dodge in the sixes game. And they had a very difficult time doing it. Whereas the Canadians played box lacrosse in the sixes game, and they pounded the Canadians. Because in sixes, it's 5-on-5. And 5-on-5 it lends itself to the two-man game just perfectly. You got that extra guy's not in there. So if I was coaching a sixes team, I would run transition and I would run the odd ISO, no question. But you have to have a set 5-on-5 offense, and within that 5-man offense, you have to have a two-man game. Because, for example, if you're going to the Worlds, you're going to be playing any of the North American teams. They're going to be playing a two-man game in sixes, 100%.
Okay. I'll obviously jump in anyone with questions, or put them in the chat as Dave did. Emily's about to type something, so let's see what she's saying. And good evening, Emily, as well. Thank you for joining. Dave. Well, actually, Emily, can you? Emily's asked, Walt, could you explain the slip pick again? Because Emily had a bit of a mic and video issue while you were explaining the slip pick. Do you want to draw out that slip pick again for us, please?
Sure. I'll also mention, and I'm not sure whether Emily coaches men's or women's, they're now initiating in the United States, because women's box lacrosse is very popular in the United States and in Canada now, but in the women's field game, they're bringing in the two-man game also. And so you're starting to see the two-man game and the women's field game. And again, there has to be adjustments, etc. So can you see that? I got it set there.
Yeah, that's good.
So what happens is, say there's the ball is here on the side. Okay, and so you've got the defenders here, and there's the ball. So this player up high is going to come and set a pick. So there's the offensive player, there's the defensive player, there's the defensive player. To set a screen, this person's just going to come and set that screen. This player comes around, they roll to the net. So when you run a slip pick, and I'll show you on this side, the defense is here. When you come to set this screen, this defender and this defender are thinking that you're going to set a screen, and they know that the ball carrier is going to come over top of that screen. So this person here is thinking he has to switch. So when this guy comes to set the screen and the defender is here, he fakes like he's setting that pick, and then the defender starts to switch, and he just slips through the hole. So there's no screen set. There's no contact. There's no post. There's nothing. They literally just run a little U, just like that, or an L cut. And what happens is both of these defenders get caught flat-footed because they're expecting a screen and they're expecting a switch. And when that guy slips through there, they'll be wide open. It's very slippery and works really, really well.
Thanks, Walt. And we've got a question from Dave. Jump in, please, Dave.
Can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah. Hi, good evening.
Excellent. No, I was interesting when you said there's you just have to, well, there's no communication in advance, so you just have to build up that rapport with your teammate. I was wondering if you could go through the different options or different types of picks, and also when you're faced with different defenses, so if they always switch or they always double, what are your sort of counter moves to that?
Well, if they're always the beauty of the two-man game is you want them to switch, because every time they switch, there's a possibility for an advantage for your offense. So if they switch, maybe you can run past them. If they switch and they don't do it properly, if they switch, you can pick and repick, which will catch them. If they switch and they don't do it properly and they try to fight over the screen, maybe the offensive player will get a step. So you want them to switch.
So vice versa then, if they don't switch, if they are always fighting over the pick,
well,
what's your counter to that?
Because if the pick is set properly, whether it's a pick or a post, whatever you want to call it, well, because a post is different than a pick, right, as I explained to you. If it's done properly, they can't fight over it. That's the beauty of it. So when you teach them to do it properly, fighting over it's not an option. You can't fight over it, because when you try to fight over it, you're going to get picked off. We call it being picked off. So you're going to
Walt, in
counter it if they double on the pick. So you have the man playing the ball who would be the one getting picked off.
Yes. He's going to switch. So the defender, if you can imagine here.
So rather than switching, the ball player.
If this is the beauty of the two-man game also. So if the two-man game is run properly, they have to switch. They can't fight over it. So if they don't switch, then the ball carrier will be wide open. So what happens, for example, say the ball is here, okay, and there's a defender here. Can you see that? Yes?
Yep.
Okay, and say here's an offensive player here, and here's a defender. So this defender here, he's the switch man. The person that switches is always the person who's checking the guy that's setting the screen. Okay, so I'll call this guy A, and this guy is B. So the person that's checking A, the ball is here with B. The person that's checking A, he has to switch. Because when this guy comes over and sets this screen, this defender here, who's checking B, cannot fight over that pick. He can't, if it's done properly. So then what happens, so now you have the screen here. Here's A, defender A is now here. So as the ball comes over top, A jumps. There's the switch. So as soon as that jump happens, if you look here, look at this defender B. Defender B is here, and the person that set the screen is here. The person that sets the screen is now inside the defender. So when the person who set the screen goes to the net, he has a step on that defender. The defender's behind him.
I think it's the difference between box and with field and sixes, because you're not allowed any movement in field, where in box you're allowed to actually, you say about a proper pick and making sure you can't fight over it. If you're setting a stationary pick, which you have to in field, then there's a possibility where both defenders can play.
Absolutely. So what if you watch the two-man game, when you watch Denver play, for example, and I've watched them play, they have the same rules that you do.
Over the pick.
And so what they do is they set a stationary screen. So they'll set that stationary screen, a legal stationary screen. The difference is after the defender has gone over top, they'll roll to the net. And when they roll to the net, they don't touch anybody. So there's no contact. If the defender does actually run into them, that's not an illegal screen. And after the defender runs into them, they can turn and roll to the net legally, because they're going away from the defender who just bumped into them. The key here is timing. Obviously, if they set the screen and as the defender hits them, they start rolling to the net and there's contact, that's an illegal screen.
So with the timing of the pick, obviously to making like a pick in your usage,
right?
Is it the responsibility of the pick man to decide where and when he sets his pick, or is it the responsibility of the ball handler to make sure he uses that pick properly?
So what we do, that's a good question. So what you have to do is, if you're the ball carrier, you have to know that there's a screen coming, and we call it you set your man up. So the ball carrier will set his man up for the screen. And maybe what he'll do is start to go away from the screen and then turn. So say you're going to set a screen on the defender's left shoulder. So I'll start to go to the right, and which will bring the person who's checking me, I've got the ball. He starts to go to the right. Let me show you here. So again, we'll go back here. So say the ball carrier's here, and the picker's coming this way. It isn't one or the other. The person who's setting the screen, he's going to decide where he sets that screen. That's not up to the ball carrier. The ball carrier has to react to where the screen is set. But what this person can do is, he sees this pick coming, he can actually start to go this way, away from the pick, just with a simple dodge step or a jab step. And then, so the defender starts to go with him, and then he turns and comes back this way. When he comes back this way, boom, there's the pick. So that this defender doesn't see the pick coming because he's going to the left, and then he turns to the right, and boom, there's the pick. Now, when that pick's set, that's a legal screen. As long as he's set there, that's legal. So when they come across, he runs into this player, that's legal. There's no violation. This person comes across here, this defender switches, and then this guy rolls to the net. That's not illegal.
I think that setting is really useful, because the biggest problems I see are people setting picks that aren't in proper picks. They just don't have contact. So you'll have a teammate run up to you or run up to a ball carrier, and then that player will dodge, but there'll be no contact with the pick. Or conversely, if they do come and set the pick and it's stationary, then, they come and set the pick, then it's called for a moving pick. So as the setting is, you're basically saying, always take your man away from the pick to allow the pick to be set, and then when it's set, that's when you change direction.
Right. And what you said is something that we work on too. We work on a sweep and box across. So I'll just give you an example. I think this is kind of what you're talking about. So say the offense is here and the guy's got the ball there and there's the defender. So this player wants to sweep across this way. And so say the other offensive player sets a post right here. Okay. So then what happens is this offensive player sometimes will go high over that screen, and then that allows that defender to go over the screen. So that's kind of what you were talking about, right? There's no pick there. This guy with the ball, it's his responsibility to go right off his shoulder. We call it going off his ass, but going off his butt, right? Right there. You want to go right off his shoulder. Now, if I run right off his shoulder, that defender cannot fight over that pick. He can't, but if I go wide, he can slip in there. If I go right off his shoulder, he can't fight over that. That's why I told you, if it's done properly, you can't fight over the pick. If this guy's going over top like that, that's not because the pick is wrong. It's because the ball carrier is doing the wrong thing. So you have to teach the ball carrier to run their man into the pick.
It's that making it clear on, like you say, it's the ball carrier's responsibility. Then you can set the pick and always be stationary, and the ball carrier has to use you. And I think there's a lot of confusion.
Exactly.
It's a lot of confusion on, they want to set picks, you coach it and you do it in practice, but then in the game, it doesn't work. It's either, like you said, they go and stand next to someone, but they don't engage the pick, or they get called for a moving pick. So it's
part of the responsibility of the coach and the coaches is to teach it. When I say properly, I'm saying that respectfully, right? So if the kids aren't doing it right, then they have to do it right. And you have to show them how to do that. And remember, when you're using the term pick, are you running picks or are you running posts? Because
what's the difference?
If you're running a post, the player who sets, which is what I saw when I watched the flags, for example, a post is if the player sets a screen, and then after the ball carrier goes past the screen, they don't do anything. They just stand there. That's a post.
Right. I've not heard that phrase before.
Okay. Well, some of this is
so we have picks and we have seals where I set a pick on my own man. But right, again, one of the biggest problems is we do probably more posts then, because the pick man will just stand still rather than cutting to the goal afterwards or slipping to the goal.
So another thing that I'll clarify with you is, and I run into this in box lacrosse too, some of the terminology that I'm using here is Walt Christianson's terminology. So when I was coaching box lacrosse, for example, in Canada, I would have players from all over Canada playing for me. When I was coaching the NLL, I would have players from all over the United States and Canada playing for me in the NLL. And what happens is people use different terminology in different places. That's where sometimes it's called a brush, sometimes it's called a pick, sometimes it's called a screen, different terminology. So Walt Christianson calls it a pick or a screen. Walt Christianson calls it a slip or a brush. You might have Matt Brown at Denver. He might call it something totally different, but when you watch it, it's exactly the same as what I'm showing you. He'll just call it something else. So now what you're calling a pick, you're saying, well, I'm telling my players to pick. When I'm watching what I've seen of the majority of field lacrosse in England, they're not. So in Walt's terminology, a pick means after they set that screen, they roll to the net. The person who set the screen rolls to the net. That's a pick. If they're just going to stand there and let the person with the ball use them to run around them, that's a post. So post can be valuable. Like, there's nothing wrong with running posts in an offense. It's not a bad thing. It's just when you start rolling to the net, the guy who set the screen starts going to the net after he sets that post or the pick, whatever you want to call it, that adds another dimension. That's the two-man game. So there's different levels of two-man game. So the first level of two-man game is I'm just going to come over there and I'm going to stand there and let you run past me. That's a post. The second level is I'm going to go set a pick. I'm going to stand there, but after you go past me, I'm going to roll to the net. The third level of the game is I'm going to set a pick, and then I'm going to come back and pick the second time. And then the next time they come over, I'm going to slip. So now that's the next level of the two-man game. So the simplest level of the two-man game is what a lot of teams are doing now. That's the simplest level. Just get one person, stands there, and you try to run your man into him. That is a two-man game, but it's the very simplest level. There are 4 other levels to go to, and it's those other 4 levels where you really start seeing the difference.
Right, thanks. The terminology, because when you say a pick or a brush, the brush pick.
Sorry, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I've lost you as well.
So,
Yeah.
but you're only getting a piece of him. So you let him through, and then you go to the goal. So ideally, the switch has switched.
Right.
You're letting the on-ball defender go through to the ball. So you've now got two men on the ball, and you're free.
Correct.
But
Correct.
that's
That's
an American terminology rather than
well,
like a boxing.
it's actually box lacrosse terminology. The Americans got it from us.
Right. So a brush pick is different from what you're referring to as a proper pick.
Correct. The brush pick is what
Right.
you just described. You go over and look like you're going to set a pick, and no pick is set.
Right.
You just pretend like you're setting a pick, but you have to set the defender up. You can't just brush all the time because then they just know you're going to do it. The brush pick is set. We tell them to set a brush pick like 1 out of every 4 picks. So they go over and set a legitimate pick. Then they go over and they set a pick repick. And then they go over the third time to set the pick. Then they brush. Now the defender's really screwed up because they don't know what you're going to do. That's the beauty of it.
And this is the watching box lacrosse and watching the NLL. They do amazing things and it's amazingly effective. But how they get there, how do they get to that level of knowledge? And like you say, the calling it a post is where you just stand still. Calling it a pick is when you cut to the goal. But then there's pick and pops, there's pick and slips, there's brush picks, and it's that we don't have that background of knowledge to understand what the difference in the meaning of the terms are, and that's the difficult bit.
And
what I might do, I'll just jump in if that's okay, Walt, because this is relevant to the question that Danny has put into the chat. He's asked, do you have any specific drills which you'd recommend to develop the two-man game? Would you do it in isolation? Would you practice it on a 6v6? So, Walt, give us something that, as like an average club, English club, could do at their training session to give them that first step into the two-man game. What would be the simple first step drill that you'd recommend?
The first step drill would just be to run a pick and roll with no defense. So just put an offensive player wherever you think you might want them in your set, whether you're running a 1-4, whatever. Just put them on the side somewhere, probably, or up top or behind the net, and just have the player go over and set a screen. No, you can even put a cone there just so they can visualize the defender. They go over and set a cone. They go over and set a screen. The offensive player comes around the screen, and the guy who sets a pick rolls the net. They give them the ball. They shoot. That's step one.
We've got time. I'd like to just expand that, and then we'll hopefully move on. Although we're waiting for Mike to join us. I know he's a little bit delayed. Could you go back to your board and just draw out what you just said, but say with the ball starting behind goal unextended, or with the ball starting either on the left wing or the right wing. So you've done the ball coming from top centre. Just draw out, say if you've got someone behind the goal, how you would then do a simple first step drill, and that means we can give a team kind of three. If the ball's behind the goal, we can do this in a training. If the ball's up top, do this. If the ball's out wide, you try this.
So
that makes sense.
So for me, if I would, and again, I haven't coached field for a while, but I have a field background. If I was running pick and roll, I would not run a pick and roll from behind the net, because the idea of running a pick and roll is the person who sets the pick is going to go to the net to score. And what you're seeing in the NCAA is, so behind the net, they run posts, but they'll do it twice. So remember I talked to you about pick, repick? They'll run post, repost. So the dodger who's behind the net, which is what you guys traditionally do, you're going to be dodging from behind the net. That dodger now has multiple posts to run off instead of just one. So we don't actually, I wouldn't run pick and rolls from behind the net, because the person who's rolling, he's not actually rolling to the net because he's behind the net. Does that make sense? What I would do is I would run post, repost, and then say the dodger ends up going this way. And if the defense makes a mistake and he ends up with two defenders on him, then you get the person who set the two screens to go this way. And then the person with the ball would pass the ball back over here. Now you've got this guy coming out. You've got two defenders over here, or maybe just has a step on him. That will cause a slide. They have to slide. So when they slide, now he can pass to here and off you go. So what I would do if I was starting with it is I would just run a simple pick and roll from right here. So just put the ball here, and you just, for example, just line up your players like this. So these are the guys on offense, and then over here, players here, and you can do it on both sides of the floor, or both ends of the field, so you have multiple people doing it. And so then what you do is just, this person passes the ball to this person, they just come and set a screen, they come around, this guy rolls to the net, and they just keep going. Boom, 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 boom. Okay? The other thing which you can do, and I did a coaching clinic last week in Calgary, which is in Alberta, in Canada, and I had 65 box lacrosse coaches there. And sometimes you have to break it down even further. So for example, what you could do is you could put a player here, and you could put a coach. A coach can just stand there, or a player who's hurt. Give this person the ball and start with the screen right here. So don't have the person come over, just start with the guy just standing right there. This is breaking it down even more. Then you say go, he goes this way over the screen, he rolls. So what you're teaching is this person to roll, the mechanics of the roll. The beauty of the difficult thing about teaching the two-man game is you have to teach the mechanics of it, but then you also have to teach them just to play. I don't know if you can see this. This is the most important part. And I know that Dave talked about this. The most important part of the two-man game is instinct. You say, well, how did we get the English players, these kids, to get the instinct on when to slip, when to brush, when to pick? It just comes with playing. And what you're seeing in the United States is right now, box lacrosse is one of the fastest. I'm not saying this because I'm plugging box lacrosse. One of the hooks that I use when I talk to field lacrosse players, I tell them the beauty of playing box lacrosse is that, number one, they might enjoy it. The second thing is it'll make them a better field lacrosse player if they play box lacrosse, because it's a different skill set, and it actually makes them better field players. That's why I told you that one of the things they do to teach this is to let them play box lacrosse on the field. Just let them go. Just let them pick all over the place and pick and roll, pick and roll, pick and roll. Because the key to this is repetition. So the drills here would be, the first drill would be offense with a post, just a defenseman just standing there, and they just start with the guy right there. The next step is to bring the pick over. The next step is to add in defense. So there's 3 different steps. The third step is to actually add in defense. When you add in defense, I tell the defense to play dummy defense. So what they do is the defense comes, so the defender will come over on the pick, the defender will switch, and when this guy rolls, the defender doesn't go with them. So now we've added defense, but it's dummy defense. And then step 4 is they play live, and they go here. Then the next step is to teach them to screen this way or to screen this way. And then the next step is to teach them to slip or to brush. And so you just practice the slip and the brush. So again, you just have the defender. You can start off with a defender here. The offense is here with the ball. And you just have this person coming, set the pick, and nobody's checking this person. Nobody's checking them. And he just comes this way and just goes this way, and he gives them the ball.
Yeah.
And the next step is to add a defender who plays dummy defense. The next step is to add a defender who plays live defense. And
okay,
then,
we'll just do. We'll just wrap that up in a little while. We'll wrap that up.
One last thing. I'll just say, just to clarify, when you're teaching this, remember I told you at the beginning, you have to practice on ball and do the same thing off ball. I'll just add that in. Don't forget. So do all the stuff on ball and off ball. If you can get your kids picking and back picking and pick and rolling and repicking off ball, they're going to be incredibly dangerous. You're going to have all sorts of scoring opportunities.
Right. I'm just going to add one more. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then Mike said, "Hi, Mike. Good evening." One more question, because all those things. Of course, the final piece is that potentially tricky little pass, tight pass to the guy or the player who's running to goal, and that type of pass is obviously a box putt that happens all the time to box, but in field, there's not many passes that are like that, and a lot of field players they'll get the movement, and then that final pass just won't be caught. It will be a terrible pass. It'll be apart from is it just repetition to get those little inside passes working?
I was just going to say repetition. One of the reasons the Canadians' skill set, why they do so well in the NCAA, is at home in Canada they play box lacrosse. What we call they play box lacrosse in a phone booth, which means the whole game is played in very tight spaces with somebody slashing them and cross-checking them. So they're playing in a phone booth, and they're shooting at a net that's 4x4. So they're used to guys slashing them, cross-checking them in a phone booth, and they have to catch the ball on the run and then shoot at a goalie who's 4 feet wide on a 4-foot net. And so then all of a sudden these Canadian kids go down to the United States and they're shooting at a 6-foot net, and the defenseman can't touch them if they don't have the ball. And the Canadian kids are going, oh, thank you very much. This is easy.
Good stuff. Right. Any final questions for Walt? Jump in. If not, Walt.
One last thing I will give you my 2 cents worth on this, and I debated this at length with my son's coach in Pittsburgh. Him and I were actually good friends, and he trusted me because I was a coach too. We used to talk all the time. Here's my theory on teaching players. This is just Walt's theory, and very debatable. Teaching players to use both hands. In Canada, the kids only use one hand. That's all they do, all the time. They're either left-handed or they're right-handed. And I coach field lacrosse, and when I coached field lacrosse 15 years ago, I taught my kids to use both hands. When I watched my son play in Pittsburgh, and I watched hundreds of games, Virginia, Denver, Duke, I watched them all. When you look at the best field lacrosse players, when they're sweeping across looking for a shot, 90% of the time, how will they shoot the ball? With their strong hand. You'll rarely see, there's some guys who can shoot equally as well with both hands, but 90% of the time, if they need a goal, they're going to shoot with their strong hand. So my theory is, I think we're doing an injustice to the kids by spending 50% of our time teaching them to use their weak hand, and that's why they're not very good with their strong hand, because we're wasting 50% of our time teaching them to use their weak hand when they're not going to use it anyway. They can use it to pass, they can use it to, dodge, but when it comes time to shoot, how many of your kids actually shoot with their weak hand? They're going to go to their strong hand. So if I was coaching field lacrosse now, I would not teach my kids to use both hands. And the Canadian kids playing the NCAA, say, oh, well, you got to have 2 hands. No, you don't. All those Canadian kids in the NCAA, they use their weak hand to pass. They use their strong hand to shoot.
Well, anyone want to agree or disagree with Walt on that one? Because I certainly, in my time, it was, oh, you've got no left hand, Rob. You're rubbish. I was rubbish anyway, but I had no left hand. But Mike, you've joined us. Thanks, Mike. What are your thoughts on that one as a old school kind of guy?
As an old school player, well, I was one of the guys. I never had a really strong shot on either hand, but I could shoot equally well on both hands. So it made me a little bit more dangerous because of which side I could dodge to. So I think that's the caveat to what you're saying, Walt, is you can dodge both ways. But if you've got a really strong hand and a really, really strong shot on that one hand, you watch, who's the guy who plays at Duke right now?
For every one guy, I had a bit of an epiphany, Mike.
Yeah.
Because I was watching my son play all these games, right? I was watching hundreds of field lacrosse games.
Yeah.
And I kept specifically waiting for one of these guys who was a really, really good player to shoot with their weak hand. And they would shoot 1 out of every 20 shots with their weak hand. If they needed a goal,
yep.
If the game's on the line and I need a goal, they're shooting the ball with the strong hand.
Sure.
And so what you just said too is, you see people where their hands are equally. You say, well, I can shoot the ball equally with both hands. But my opinion is, but your equal is 60%. So you're 60% with your right, 60% with your left.
Yeah.
The Canadian kids are 100% with their left. And that's why they have better hands and they can shoot better. I know the traditionalists will not like that. The traditionalists say, no, you have to use both hands. But I watched and I did not see these kids shooting with their weak hands. It just doesn't happen.
I'm all for not being traditionalist, and if things are got to change, you've got to change. And if that's what thing people are finding is the strongest way, and in your experience it is, then if it works, why not? Why try and fix something that works?
Well, that's just my opinion. But
I'll take it back to a soccer analogy. Lionel Messi, pretty much predominantly left-footed, you wouldn't have seen him do too much with his right foot or his head, to be honest. And he's probably the best player that's lived on the planet.
Really interesting comment from Emily. Thanks, Emily. So if you keep with one hand, do you then become a bit lopsided? Do you then become a bit unbalanced? Do you then get injuries? What's it like if you're equal left and right? You kind of, because I remember half my back when I was in my 20s, half my back was a bit. I could turn one way because that's the way I passed, but I couldn't go this side. I can't get my back rotated there. Mike, what are your thoughts on?
If I'm understanding Walt right, he's not saying you're just going to be completely one-handed. He's saying these strong Canadian players, they can do stuff on their offhand. It's just they will go and score with their strongest hand. That's the strongest point of their game.
Right.
You can still throw, you can still catch and get away from a situation. So you're not going to be lopsided because you can still use that side if you need to.
My theory is if you and I are both equal and we take 100 shots a day and I take 90 shots a day with my left hand and 10 with my right, and you take 50 with your left and 50 with your right, when I shoot left-handed, I'm going to be a better shooter than you are with either one of your hands. That's my theory. That's just Walt's theory. And,
I
you could also
understand.
argue, and you could say, well, I know you're left-handed, I'm going to take it away. But as I said, when I watched Duke, I watched all these teams play. And 90% of those really, really good players did not shoot with their weak hand when the game was on the line. When they would dodge, they would go back and forth, but they always went strong side. Always. They would shoot it once in a while with their weak hand, but it sucked when they shot it.
Okay.
Right, I'll tell you what. Let's just. Dave, you just come. Yeah, you got your hand up. In you come, Dave.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Just going on what Mike Barrett said. I completely agree. I am that old person that when I was taught that you had to play left and right-handed, and all the coaches agreed and all the players agreed, and we couldn't do it, but we all tried to play equally with both hands and practice half of our team practice, which is a limited resource, practicing with one hand. But when you actually look at professional sports, how many basketball players do you see that can shoot with their weak hand? How many footballers when the push comes to shove, can shoot effectively with both feet? Even in baseball, there are some players that are switch hitters and some pitchers that can actually pitch from both sides of the mound. But 99.9% of them at the top of the sport are right-handed or left-handed, are right-handed batters or left-handed batters, or left-footed or right-footed players, or left-footed or right-footed or right-handed shooters in basketball. So I'm a complete convert and agree with Walt. I was taught my whole life as a player and as a junior that I had to practice both sides, and I did that. But then once I stopped playing and looking at coaching, it doesn't make any sense at all. Because all the best players at the collegiate level and in the world, and they're predominantly one side dominant. So Gary Gates, John Grant Jr.
Another little trick you can do.
How many players are completely two and are effective both sides? Paul Rabel, Tom Schreiber. I'm struggling for a third. Even
they're out there.
American players are one hand dominant.
Rob Gooch.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, obviously, present company accepted, Rob. But yeah, it's the epiphany moment, or believing one thing is absolute truth, but then you find out and you look at more information, more games and more sports. And I understand biomechanically and health-wise, if I always did something only with one foot, that yes, you may have an imbalance, but from a sporting competitive point of view, exactly as Walt explained, if I spend half my time left-handed, half my time right-handed, and I only have a limited amount of time, I'm not going to be as effective with either hand as somebody who spent their whole career learning how to get open to their right side to shoot the right side. So I'm a convert.
And
Okay.
they still use their weak hand to get out of trouble. They use their weak
Yeah,
hand
to pass when need be, but it's break glass and emergency.
But when it comes time to shooting, you have a strong hand. You have a dominant hand. And because you practice it 90% of the time, it's going to be better than if you split. That's, again, just my opinion.
I'm going to draw a line under this now because we've talked a lot and Mike's got stuff to share. So Walt, thank you very much. Stay on, obviously, because there's things to lots of discussion still to have. And if you want to keep throwing things in the chat, we can make sure those questions get to Walt after the session. And if you've got time over the next few weeks, you can maybe
If anybody ever wants to discuss the two-man game, I'm more than happy to talk to you. So just get a hold of me. You can email, text me. I'm on WhatsApp, and I'm happy to spend as much time as necessary with you. So,
yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Walt. Right.